Hello and welcome to this West London Sport QPR podcast. I'm joined as always by my West London Sport colleague Ian McCullough. No Kevin Gallen this week, who's away in Ireland, but we've drafted in another QPR legend in Ben Kosky instead. So no manager appointed yet at the time we're talking, following Mark Warburton's departure, but we do have some news on that front. Report on West London Sports website this morning saying QPR will look to speak to Gareth Ainsworth about the vacant position. Obviously, his Wycombe side losing to Sunderland in the League One playoff final on Saturday, was it? I think Saturday. Obviously, not the only person in the frame for the job, though. Just one of a number of names being considered. You've got Newport County's James Rowberry is among the names being considered as well. Liam Manning at MK Dons, Karl Robinson at Oxford United. But I mean, I want to talk today really about the first name I mentioned there, which is Gareth Ainsworth. Obviously, got his links to the club, very popular among a large part of the fan base, given that he spent a lot of time there as a player and a couple of stints as caretaker manager as well. And some support from the club hierarchy to appoint him as the manager. So he's very well liked. I mean, I'll come to you first on this, Ben, because obviously having read your book, I know you and Gareth Ainsworth, you obviously had a relationship at the club before, didn't you? You were covering QPR at the time. He was there as a player, and obviously, like I said, he had those couple of stints as caretaker manager as well during that Palladini era. I mean, things have obviously changed since, but I mean, to you, does Ainsworth make any sense right now as a managerial appointment for QPR, given what you kind of know about him?
Well, I think he's certainly a name that had to be in the conversation, Dan. I mean, as you say, I got to know Gareth quite well while he was there as a player. He did a weekly column for local newspapers for a couple of years, so I did speak to him quite regularly. And I think what I could say about him is probably the characteristics that most people know, namely that he's extremely nice bloke. He's extremely professional, thorough, committed to the cause, whichever cause that happens to be. I mean, he's kind of unique that he's got this kind of status at a number of clubs that he's either played for or latterly Wycombe, where he's managed for a long time. And I think it's a natural thing when there's a managerial vacancy. Certain clubs, and QPR is one of those, we tend to look at someone who has got a prior connection with the club, who was a popular player, and is in management and has done well. And Gareth Ainsworth ticks those boxes. So I think it would be a surprise if the club weren't looking at him as an option. Question I have is whether it's an option he would actually be interested in, and I'm not convinced that it is. I think the time he's been at Wycombe, you look at the way that the club has changed. When he took over there as manager, they were trying to avoid dropping out of the Football League, and they're now a club that have an expectation of challenging for a place in the Championship. So it's a real transformation, and and I just wonder whether he feels it's the end, or would feel it's the end of the road at Wycombe for him. But you mentioned, Dan, he had obviously two spells as caretaker manager at QPR. I think it would be very hard to judge him on those, really. Because
I mean, obviously that was a long time ago, and I think 10 years at Wycombe probably takes the precedent,
Yeah, I mean, you look at the times he was in charge of the team, and obviously everyone knows that the circumstances of the club, the interference from the board, the situation with not having a say over which players came and went or were picked in the team. It's very hard to judge someone on those. But no doubt, as you say, he's a very popular player among the fan base. And I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Is that what the club needs at the moment? Is it someone who has got the right character, who will just give everyone a lift? Because let's be honest, spirits have dipped a bit in the last few months.
I mean, I'd say you mentioned from Ainsworth's perspective there, but from QPR's perspective, does it make sense then to appoint Ainsworth at this time? Is this kind of the right time, do you think, for him? I mean, it seems like he's going to manage QPR at some point. Like, it's kind of, it seems like it's definitely like on the cards at some point, whether it's now or later. But Does that make sense now for the club, do you think?
I'm not convinced it does, to be perfectly honest, Dan. I think, as I say, we always look at these things, and I mean, Ian will remember as well that there's that kind of surge of excitement when you have a former playing favourite come back to manage the club. Going back some years, Terry Venables, Jerry Francis, maybe Ian Holloway, even. There's that feeling of they get the club, they know the club, that they know what the fans want, and so on. So you can see the logic to it, but I just feel maybe with the kind of the indications that the club have given about what they're looking for, about the kind of manager they want and what they want their priorities to be. I could honestly see some of the other names you mentioned, Dan, being perhaps more logical choices at this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that said, spent 10 years at Wycombe, a couple of promotions, obviously, from the CV, league, going up from League Two, getting up from League One as well. I mean, Ian, is he the standout for you when you look at the names I've just mentioned and the names being that we know are on the radar for QPR? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, like Ben, I've known Gareth sort of from a long time ago. Like when God was a boy, I used to work for Wimbledon Football Club, and Gareth was playing there, and he was perennially injured. So, I used to go for lunch in the players' canteen, and he'd usually be there. And he's a super guy, really friendly, very approachable, lovely bloke. And he was a great player for QPR, really, wholehearted, and terrific guy, as I say. But does that make him the right choice to be QPR manager? For me, no. I think he's done a brilliant job at Wycombe. With low budgets, the small club, etc. But it's a big step up taking on Wycombe to managing QPR. I think as well as a style of football. They're almost unapologetically crash bang wallop the way that his sides play. It suits the players they got. The big man up top, get it forward quickly. I think there was a stat that went up during the semi-final against MK Dons, Liam Manning's MK Dons, where they were 23rd in all departments when it comes to kind of passing and short range passing, etc. And MK Dons
possession as well.
MK Dons were
right
top.
On the bottom.
Now that doesn't mean to say styles make fights, as I say in boxing. So there's no wrong way to play football, no right way to play football. It's about results, especially in terms of managers. If you win, you keep your job. If you lose your job. That's basically the nuts and bolts of it. However, when you've got a team that's been put together by Mark Warburton, that's ingrained in playing a certain way, to bring a manager in that plays a complete opposite way to what they've played over the last 3 years makes no sense whatsoever. And the fact that, I mean, is he being considered because he played the QPR before and he's well liked by the fans? If that's your reasoning for making a manager, then that's really not what you want, in my opinion. He deserves the respect to be looked at what he's done at Wycombe over 10 years. He's gone from keeping them in the league to getting them into the Championship. But at the same time, he's been at Wycombe for 10 years. Why has no one else come and taken a punt on him? Now, you have to ask that question. And I think I'm going to disagree with Ben. I think he'd walk over hot coals to be QPR manager. He's got a great affinity to the club, and it's still a good club. It's a great club to manage. It's in London. There's a good core of players there. It's got a good profile. I think, a lot of people will want this job. And also as well, I think Rangers aren't at a low ebb at the moment. There's disappointment for not making the playoffs and the way their season's spun out of control. But, it's still a pretty good season by and large last season. And, as we've already described in previous pods, injuries, etc., kind of, cruelled the end of the season. And I think it's a completely different situation to when Ian Holloway came in on both occasions, where the club really was in a bad position, and his kind of personality and his enthusiasm was what was needed at the time to kind of lift, the fan base, the players, etc. I don't think that is the case at the moment. And I think if you've got players like Chris Willock, Ilias Chair, these types of footballers, you know, are they going to respond to having a manager that is going to want to play a style that's completely alien to what they've been used to playing and how they played? Is that going to, I don't know, what effect is that going to have on them? You know, you go from having someone like Neil Banfield working as your first team coach, who's worked at Arsenal with, you know, world-class players like Thierry Henry, Bergkamp and likes, and then you've got someone that comes in that's worked with, you know, Akinfenwa, and is that going to, you know, that's no disrespect to Akinfenwa or Wickham or the likes like that, but, you know, what effect is that going to have on, you know, training methods and how players approach matches? So that would be my reservations about why he would be suitable for the QPR job. But, you know, and that's no detriment to Gareth Ainsworth as a manager and what he's achieved, but I just think for what QPR need right now, I don't think he is the answer.
So this is a big thing, in it, like what you just touched on there is what I wanted to come on to as well. It's like you look at the other names on the list. So like Liam Manning, obviously you mentioned there about the stats when they played each other in the League One playoff semi-finals. You know, Manning, very possession based, you know, likes to keep the ball. You've got Karl Robinson at Oxford, who's very similar as well, likes to build up from the back and play quite a passing based style. And then Gareth Ainsworth is just completely the opposite. And you look comparing with the other names on the list, and it's very different in that respect. He's also very different because he's got a lot more. I mean, Karl Robinson's obviously got a lot of experience, but a couple of the other names, you know, Liam Manning, James Rowberry, you know, Gareth Ainsworth's got sort of 10 years plus managerial experience behind him. So he is very different in that respect. I mean, Ben, like Ian said there, would it just be too big a jump to go from Mark Warburton's style of football where, you know, the team's building out from defence into midfield, getting the ball into Chair and Willock, to go to Gareth Ainsworth, which is, you know, I think, Ian, you're right. It's not fair to kind of point at Wickham and laugh and say that they're just playing long ball and, you know, lumping it up to the striker. You know, yeah, I mean, I watched the League One playoff final and they do like to get the ball into defence, switch it out to the wings and get crosses in the box. That is the way they play, but it's been very effective at Wickham, and, you know, there's no right way to play. But Ben, do you think it would just be too big of a jump to go from Warburton to Ainsworth style of play that we've seen at Wickham the last sort of few years that he's been there?
Yeah, I'm actually going to agree with Ian on that one. I do think when you've got certain players in place now, you know, a new manager might tinker with the system a bit. You know, do you stay 3 at the back, or do you, you know, go back to 4 or whatever? But by and large, I don't think you can have a completely sort of tear up the game plan and the system and the style of football. And yes, I think that is possibly what you might expect with a Gareth Ainsworth side. I think just also picking up on something else that's been mentioned. I think Ian said, you know, 10 years Gareth has been at Wickham, and that is an incredibly long time for any manager these days at any level. And it does just sort of make you wonder about, does he, you know, look at a career path, so to speak? Is he someone who's thinking, I want to reach the top level as a manager? Because not everyone is. And you look at other sort of younger managers as well, because, you know, Gareth is not, I mean, he's, you know, he was always described as a veteran player, I think. I mean, but he's late 40s now, so he's not quite the same generation as people like Liam Manning. And again, you look at that career pathway, you think, well, yeah, 10 years at the same club. Do you just envisage yourself staying at that club? Because I would think he has a job for life, you know, if he wants it there. And maybe, again, looking at the job spec, I get the feeling we're thinking more of somebody who's a bit younger and is looking for the next step. They've done well in League One, maybe League Two, and now they're thinking, right, I want to test myself in the Championship and then hopefully move on from there. And just one other point I would make from Gareth's point of view, Ian said, you think he'd walk over hot coals. I think that there's always going to be a little bit of sort of reticence about that situation, because anyone would naturally, who's been a very popular player at a club, is going to perhaps be concerned about their legacy being tarnished if they go back as manager and it doesn't work out. Because we do see that happen. We see that happen at many clubs. You could probably look to Solskjaer at Manchester United, Frank Lampard at Chelsea, perhaps. And there is that danger, and sometimes it's stick or twist, isn't it? And you think, I'd rather be remembered as that wholehearted, gung-ho winger, captain, who sort of galvanised those teams, than maybe someone who went into the job as a manager and it didn't quite work out as I would have liked.
Yeah, I mean, so that type of manager you mentioned there about, a younger manager, more developmental kind of ethos, I guess, bringing the younger players through. I mean, we know that's something like Les Ferdinand especially is quite keen on doing. And, you look at Ainsworth and you think maybe he doesn't fit that mould. But, I mean, to kind of argue the other side, Ian, is it just good management that Ainsworth has played the style of play he has done in the last few years with a club like Wycombe, who were always going to be underdogs? And, is there an argument to make that if he came to QPR with better players like Chris Willock, Ilias Chair, that he could implement, a more friendly style of play to the team that he would have at QPR? I mean, is it a bit harsh to kind of just write him off based on the style of play he's implemented at Wycombe, do you think?
Yeah, maybe. And I'm sure, in an interview, he'd probably say, well, precisely what you just outlined there. I played the way the squad... I played a style of play that suited the squad at my disposal. So, yeah. But I think, let's be frank about it. He's made no attempt absolutely at all to kind of change the style of play.
Yeah, this is the thing. He's been there 10 years.
They were there. So,
yeah.
And also you look at League One, there's still some big clubs in League One. I'd say, Wycombe are probably one of the more better resource ones, having been in the Championship, than some other clubs that, perhaps play a more progressive style of football. I think the danger you're going to have, not so much with Gareth, but with sort of other managers, is that, runs on the board, so to speak. A player will look at it, and go, well, who are you? What have you done? What am I going to learn from you, kind of thing. So they've got to be careful who they choose here. And I think any manager that comes in that, is a relative novice, so to speak, and hasn't had any experience at all of coaching in the Championship, really has to kind of, hit the ground running and, get the players on board, very quickly, because, you always hear it. I mean, Kevin would be able to, describe this far better than I can, but, players will work out coaches and managers sort of pretty quickly about what they're going to get and what they can get away with and what they can't get away with.
That's cool, isn't it?
And, Mark Warburton was an experienced manager. He managed bigger clubs than QPR and Forest and Glasgow Rangers. So he's got, as I say, the runs on the board, so to speak, about who he's coached and what he's worked with. But I think just really, I mean, QPR have talked and kind of sort of about this kind of, we now have an identity and what we want to do and how we want to play and the pathways from the youth team into the first team. We want everyone playing the same. If they were to appoint Gareth Ainsworth, that completely flies in the face of what they've been saying for the last 3 years about what we want. And, the style of play we play is put, bums on seats, shirt sales are up, away followings are bigger than they have been for many years because the team's playing well away from home and people are enjoying the style of football. They're obviously going to want to maintain that, but surely you're going to have to, it's almost like a progression signing. So you've got Mark Warburton to lay the foundation of what you got, and the next manager comes in playing a similar style and progresses it on from what Warburton has done.
Which is what they said in the statement as well. Like when they announced Warburton's departure, one of the quotes, can't remember who said it, but it was that we want to build on the style of play that we've got here at QPR. And you have to think Ainsworth, would that really be doing that, So
but I think as well, managing football clubs, it's about managing up as well as managing down. So dealing with the expectations from board level and, the director of football and what they want. And, they want more players from the academy sort of, push towards the first team and, dealing with that kind of side of things. And, Warburton was very strong in saying if they're not good enough, they're not playing. And, ultimately that probably proved to be his downfall. So you've got to deal with that and, and not allowing yourself to be a yes man, but at the same time also, acquiescing in some sort of way to what, the powers that be want you to do. So that's another challenge for the new manager coming in. So it's all very well and good saying we want a young manager to come in and play progressive football, but, can he deal with that side of things? The QPR fan base, as we said before, quite rightly, they're quite demanding in what they want to see. You've got it pretty easy at Wycombe. You've got it pretty easy at MK Dons. There isn't the pressure you have managing QPR. So all these factors have to be tied in with what they want to do. So it'd be really interesting to see what path they go down. But if they're gonna talk about this identity we have, then they kind of got to back that up with who they appoint here, because otherwise you could say almost the last 3 years has been a bit of a waste of time.
I think one thing to add there, Ian, is just thinking back to Gareth's time as a player at QPR, and I do remember it's certainly not as if he didn't take an interest in youth development, because he did. I remember talking to him a number of times about some of the younger players who were emerging at that time and who was a good prospect and who wasn't. But unfortunately, again, you look at the circumstances, and at the time it didn't really make any difference if someone was a good prospect or not, because the kind of club QPR was at that time, no young player was ever going to get an opportunity. Again, you can't judge him on that, but I would just say, I think he's certainly someone who likes to develop young talent. Whether you can look at Wycombe's record and say, well, has he done that? I don't know. It does seem he's largely sort of relied on your more experienced pros.
I don't know. He's brought Akinfenwa on, He's really developed Akinfenwa,
Well, yeah, he was only 15 when Gareth went there, so yeah.
I mean, I was speaking to Dave McIntyre obviously earlier. He's reporting, for us on the managerial situation. And he was saying that one of his misgivings, obviously, Ben, he was around obviously when you were both covering QPR as well, was that kind of how easily he went along with what Briatore and Palladini wanted when he was caretaker manager. That was sort of one of the misgivings he had. But I mean, for me, it kind of comes down to this debate between, like we've kind of spoken about, experience and style. It's, if you get a Liam Manning or a Karl Robinson, you're going to get a style of play that's not entirely dissimilar from what Mark Warburton implemented while he was at QPR, building out from the back, getting the ball into Willock and Chair in good positions and allowing them to create, which is, when we looked at QPR last season, that was when they were at their best, wasn't it? When Chair and Willock were getting on the ball and being allowed to create things. I don't think it's completely fair to, like I said, to write Ainsworth off and just say, we played quite a long ball style at Wycombe. He's not going to come to QPR and do that. But like we said, it's been, he's had 10 years there and kind of seems like he's set on that style. And I think he would obviously make changes. It's a completely different team to what he's got at Wycombe. He wouldn't just come and play exactly the same style. But I would just worry about what Ainsworth being appointed would mean for Willock and Chair. I just think maybe it would nullify their ability slightly, and I think you can't afford to do that because I think they're the two best attacking players at QPR I've got, and you have to kind of build around them rather than kind of play a different style that isn't as well suited to them. But on the other hand, you look at someone like Lyndon Dykes, could he benefit from an Ainsworth? He's not been at his best for QPR recently. Is he someone that could come and score goals? We've seen how well Sam Vokes has done for Wycombe this season as well. Sort of a similar type of players. So, go on in, sorry.
I was just going to say that I think what is important as well is that they sold Ibiri Eze for a good chunk of change because of the way they played. If you're going to sell on the likes of Chair and Willock to Premier League teams, they want to see players that can
it's
play
a good point. In
a style that is more suited to the Premier League than how Wycombe played, to be brutally honest. And in previous times, players that were sold, Luke Freeman, for example, perhaps in hindsight, it was a good deal what they got for him. But at the time, it felt 5 million felt cheap for a player that was so important to the team. But that style of football QPR playing at the time, it perhaps wasn't suited to what Premier League teams wanted. Whereas I think you're seeing, the likes of Willock and Chair, Dickey, these types of players. I'm not saying they're Premier League ready, but they're more likely to be picked off by Premier League clubs for big money, which is what QPR need to do to reinvest in the squad to kind of, make it stronger for another push at the playoffs. That's what you need the manager that's going to do. Is it going to be, when they say developing players, I think it's code for like developing players so we can sell them on.
Yeah,
is Gareth Ainsworth going to develop players to sell on? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's such a tricky balance, isn't it? Because, like say, if Liam Manning comes in and tries to give all the young players a go and develops them, but the results are terrible, it goes completely the other way. Whereas Ainsworth might come in and get results, but play a style of play, like you said, that isn't suited to the younger players. And it hurts QPR in that respect. So it's so many things you've got to consider and like a balance you've got to find. I mean, the thing I was going to say is the thing that works, I've said, in Ainsworth's favour is the experience he's got. And you look at the other names on the list, particularly, as I said, James Rowberry and Liam Manning, who have had a year. I don't think Rowberry's even had a year of managerial experience. Obviously they're both very highly rated coaches. I think Rowberry was like one of the youngest guys to get, is it like the pro license, I think, to get that. So they're obviously very highly rated coaches, and I'm not doubting that. But in terms of actual managerial experience, you've got less than a year for him and a year for Manning, whereas Ainsworth's got 10 years coming in, which I think does help and it does make a difference.
I think the interesting thing about Rowberry is, although he is relatively inexperienced as a manager, he worked at Cardiff under Warnock and Mick McCarthy.
Yeah.
So he's worked with old heads that, he's been around, and he's very highly rated in Welsh circles. He was supposedly going to be the heir apparent for the Cardiff City main job before they gave it to Steve Morrison. He moved to Newport, and he's kind of very well regarded in terms of the work he did with the Football Association of Wales, sort of bringing through the guys like Harry Wilson and these young lads that are, Wales have got quite a strong side now. He's quite integral of that, which is a kind of a path that Steve Cooper had. He's now doing so well at Forest, so I might look at that and think, yeah, that's kind of what we want as well. So it's, again, who they'll sign appoint, I don't know, but there's, as you say, there's pros and cons to
everyone. Yeah, and it's so difficult. And hopefully in the next few days there might be some news, or in the next week or so. I mean, Ben, but you mentioned the positives of like a Rowberry or a Manning there, but it's the big punt, isn't it, to take on, pointing the managers to a club like QPR who's had very little managerial experience. I mean, every appointment comes with risk, but you'd have to say those sort of appointments would come with more risk than usual just because of the uncertainty around them. Yeah,
they would. I mean, and I'm trying to think of a precedent in QPR history, and I honestly can't think of one. I mean, generally, as we've said, when you've played for a club or you've got a prior connection with a club, it gives you extra credit in the bank, rightly or wrongly. So, for instance, if you look back to when Ian Holloway was appointed first time, now you could have on the face of it said, well, he's only managed Bristol Rovers in the league below, so why is he getting the QPR job? But he'd been a player there, so it was kind of seen as the right thing, and I would say it was the right thing at the time as well. A guy like Manning or Rowberry who's got no prior connection with QPR, that there'll be more questions asked. So it would be a punt. I mean, and I suppose the other factor you have to sort of consider is if you do bring in a bright young thing like that and they do very well, then you might not have them there for very long. In a year's time, say they've overseen a really good season for QPR, all of a sudden, bigger clubs will come sniffing around.
I mean, Graham Potter, obviously, he didn't even have a great season at Swansea, but he was snapped up for Brighton, very quickly.
Yeah.
They saw potential in him, so it definitely can happen.
Yeah. And Manning has a similar path to him. He's coached in Belgium, I think.
And then West Ham.
I've cut his teeth at West Ham's, on the 23 side. So, and I mean, football clubs, a lot of it is copycat, isn't it? What's in vogue at the moment. Graham Potter's in vogue, which, led to sort of Steve Cooper getting a job at Swansea because it was in vogue to have young coaches that are good with youth. So, I think Rangers are probably looking at that avenue because that's where football's going. You are seeing more and more younger managers coming in. The days of the old school Neil Warnock type of manager are kind of, drifting into the past now, really. It's a younger man's game, it seems.
Yeah, it's such a big. It's so interesting. Such a big appointment that they're going to have to make because there's so much uncertainty around the whole thing, and every candidate's linked with the job has got pros and cons, and it's not like there's kind of experienced, obvious guy out there that they can go and get. It's there's going to be a risk with whoever they appoint. I mean, I don't want to reflect on it too much because it's it's in the past now, but I do look at it and think, Warburton kind of has the edge over those names as we kind of touched on before, and maybe it would have been better to give him another year, but it's all in the past now. And I also think maybe everything we've spoken about, maybe someone like Karl Robinson might be kind of, you get a bit of both, you get the experience and you get the style of play. Maybe he might be the way to go. I don't know. That's just my own opinion. Obviously, I'm not reporting.
He's interviewed for he was interviewed for the job.
Yeah, he's been
in the past. So
I think he's a good manager as well. I do rate him. I think he's done a good job at Oxford over the years. So maybe someone like that might be a bit less risk than like a Manning, and you also get the style of play that could benefit.
You can also look at Robinson's record of. I mean, when he was at Charlton, they obviously had people like Ezri Konsa who came through and was sold on for a lot of money, and I'm just trying to think of the name of the forward who's, I'm afraid his name escapes me now, who I think went to play in Germany. Anyway, but there's
remember it later.
I'll remember it later when
as soon as we hang up. Yeah.
But and I think another point with Karl Robinson, of course, is he is still quite young, but has a lot of experience because he did.
Yeah, because he was wasn't he like 29 or something when he started
MK Dons. So he kind of, in that sense, ticks both boxes.
That's what I'm
young,
saying. Is it
not a rookie?
You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. I feel like maybe he could be the way to go, but we'll see. Anyway, hopefully we'll have some news in the next week or so. We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for watching as well. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel as well if you've not done already, and comment below on what you think, whether Ainsworth should get the job, whether someone else should get the job, and your thoughts on that. And we'll be back soon, hopefully, when a new manager's been appointed. So thanks for watching.